wormholes, particle physics, extra dimensions. Are the wonders of so-called reality really what they appear to be? Or do we exist in an elaborate hologram? Is our universe the result of random activity or the result of intelligent design? If a creator was involved, can we discover him through our perception of divine order? This is Into the Multiverse with Josh Peck.
Is there a secret code embedded on the surface of Mars? Well, we brought Tim Alberino in studio so we could ask that very question. Welcome to Into the Multiverse. In studio with me is my lovely, beautiful wife, and as I mentioned, Tim Alberino. How you doing, Tim?
It's fantastic to be in the multiverse.
Yeah, it's good to have you in the multiverse with us. We've done Sharpening Report, we've done Skywatch TV, and now Multiverse. Well, this might be some people's first time watching Into the Multiverse. Where can they find us online?
Okay, you can find us on YouTube. Go to youtube.com/Into the Multiverse, or skywatchtv.com is our homepage. And you can scroll down on the right-hand side until you come across a lovely picture of Josh and I. If you click on that, it takes you right to our YouTube channel. And also, we're on Roku under the Skywatch TV channel.
Excellent. Fantastic picture of you, maybe, but you got to stand by me. So, well, before we get started, I want to show you this trailer that for The Unholy Sea, a documentary film that Steve Quayle and Tim Alberino collaborated on together. Check this out.
They say this thing had been dead for maybe a day or two. We estimated his size at approximately 12 to 10 feet tall. The giant killed the first team that they came across. He was extremely big and fast and agile for a guy that size.
The popes and the agents of the Holy See have known about the giants for many centuries.
And do you believe that they have artifacts from the past that would help explain some of what's going on?
Absolutely sure.
The Vatican knows all the secrets. Secretly preparing for the arrival of alien saviors.
They seem to be intentionally creating dogma that is going to position the Roman Catholic Church to be at the forefront of an official disclosure moment.
The Vatican is involved in ufology in ways that we can't even imagine.
So while we're standing here in the headquarters of the Jesuits, tell us about Mount Graham.
They are constantly monitoring things with the Lucifer device. Sometimes they have to wait for all of the UFOs to get out of the way.
I would like to tell you more about Zecharia Sitchin. He told me, John Mario, one night I wake up and I saw an Anunnaki sitting on my bed.
History is being repeated. The days of Noah are returning.
The gods are returning to the earth to dwell among men and mingle their seed with the human race.
Only the truth can prepare us for the lie that's coming.
All right, fantastic stuff. I've seen the documentary. It's amazing, mind-blowing content. There's so much in there that we could do a whole series of shows on. But you actually had brought something in a folder marked Top Secret.
Yeah, well, that's my son's folder from a TV show.
That kind of ruined the allure.
I mean, it's from an underground base that I was in the other.
There you go. Now that we fixed that up.
It was handed to me by a 5-star general in an undisclosed parking lot.
Exactly.
It's nothing we can't fix with editing, honey.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I'm actually glad that you brought this, because when I first saw it was when I was setting up for the Skywatch TV programs, and I just happened to overhear and look over at what you were showing, and Sharon got kind of a funny picture of
it's great.
the absolute moment when I saw this, so we'll show that. But this is mind-blowing stuff, and we had actually been talking for a couple of months now about wanting to do a show like this about Mars and some of David Flynn's work, and we even talked to Mark Flynn about it.
Yep.
Because at some point we're going to bring him on for an interview. But I think this is a really important topic, and I'm glad that we're doing a show like this. What did you bring?
Well, last month, NASA released a photo, very unusual photo, of the surface of Mars under the heading Morse code on Mars. And the media ran with this story as if they were instructed to run with this story under the heading of Morse code on Mars, and they made a big deal about it, wondering, is this image that NASA released, this image here, which I have a file for you to put on the screen of it, is this representative of some kind of numerical language such as Morse code? Now, it was stated tongue-in-cheek, both by NASA and then by the media outlets, many of the major media outlets that ran this story. And even in NASA's own article, if you go to NASA's website, you'll see the heading Morse code on Mars, and then you'll read the article where they basically debunk the idea that this is Morse code on Mars.
So they put forth the idea, and then they go and debunk their own.
To debunk it and say, no, this is just the result of wind patterns and the natural formation of the sand and so forth, which doesn't really make a difference in the overarching point that I want to make, which is this so-called Morse code on Mars is analogous with what is known as the geoglyphs of Tiwanaku.
And that's something that you and Steve covered in True Legends, the first one, Technology of the Fallen.
Right, based on an article written by David Flynn, 2012, entitled The Geoglyphs of Tiwanaku, which Tom Horn commented out in the book, the David Flynn Collection. And Tom's comment was right. He said something to the effect that this is one of the most astounding discoveries made in the modern era concerning something that could potentially be very ancient. And I agreed with that, with Tom's assessment of what David Flynn discovered, using satellite imagery that was just coming online at the time, the high-resolution stuff. He discovered these geoglyphs, and what they are raised ridge lines, and also, I'm sorry, not ridge lines. They're lines that are raised and with the earth, like as if they were constructed lines and dots and hills on the surface of the earth, but also dug into the bedrock of the earth. So you have these lines that are both raised mounds and also dug into the bedrock, forming these very intricate and interesting shapes and dots.
So completely different than what we would see, say, at like the Sahara Desert or something. Just from wind patterns.
Very different. Wow. Yeah. Normally, like if you look at wind patterns in the desert, they're going to look wavy, depending on which way the wind is blowing, which is exactly what you see in the ocean and so forth. When you have wind movement, you have usually a uniform direction that things are moving in. So it's very unlikely that these patterns that we see on the surface of Mars, whether they're sand or something else, are natural. Right. And it's very likely, in my mind, that they are in fact artificial, that they were created, especially when you compare them with the geoglyphs of Tiwanaku in Bolivia, which of course nobody has. Right. So, and I'm speaking in terms of the mainstream media and of NASA themselves. So. It's bizarre when you compare the two. When you compare the geoglyphs of Tiwanaku with the image that came out from NASA of Mars, you may be looking at, it's very possible that you're looking at the same language, the same code. Is it some kind of a numerical code like Morse code? We believe it is, and that's what we postulated in the first episode of our documentary series, True Legends.
Wow. Now does what was found in Bolivia, does that represent any kind of known code or
nothing
any kind
known.
of repetition?
Nothing known, but we have a feeling, and so did David Flynn, that it might be akin to the language that the only form of written language that the Inca had, which was called quipus. It wasn't really written. It was a series of beads and strings. And it was a very intricate form of communication. I mean, they could have the history of kings and the lineage of kings, and on a string so it's like a string with other strings attached to it at varying lengths, and knots and beads. Usually knots, but also beads, so it was a form of numeric language.
Oh wow!
Quipus was. And not only quipus, there's something else that's associated with quipus, and the name of it escapes me, but it's again from the Inca, which I think the Inca were given that knowledge, and they were using a language that existed before they invented it, so to speak. So this other form of calculating by the Inca involves squares and dots. Which is exactly, if you combine quipus, which is the ropes and the knots and the beads and so forth, with the other form of the mathematical calculations that the Inca were making using this series of squares and dots, and they were beads, like marbles almost, squares and marbles. You put them together, and that appears to be what is represented in both the Bolivian geoglyphs of Tiwanaku and the so-called Morse code on Mars.
Wow. That's amazing. Have the code on Mars, has that ever been analyzed by somebody who would know how to
people
look
are
for
analyzing it right now, and it's kind of flown under the radar, but people who are experts in Morse code have posted some things on the internet. Nothing official from NASA.
Well, right.
Yeah, NASA downplays the whole idea, even though they're the ones who started it.
Right.
So nothing from NASA, but definitely people on the internet who are familiar with Morse code are saying already, there's something here. This is not natural. It can't be natural because it's saying something. And I don't know if anybody has come out with with having decoded it, but it would be very difficult to do that unless you knew what the source language was.
Right, that makes sense.
But you can tell that there is something here. This appears to be a numerical message of some kind.
Wow.
And people are saying that.
I guess a good question would be, is there any relation to the two of crop circles and this possible...
I think it's very interesting that just after NASA took the picture with one of their satellites back in, I believe it was February of this year, so February of 2016. They released the photo in July, last month, 2016. This month, apparently, one of the most intricate crop circles that we've ever seen has appeared. Very intricate crop circle. So I do think that the geoglyphs of Tiwanaku and the Morse code, the so-called Morse code on Mars, and the crop circles are all related.
Yeah, it's more than coincidence.
I mean, in one case, in Bolivia, we know that these configurations are embedded into the earth, and are comprised of raised lines and dots and hills and are literally engraved in the earth. In this picture from NASA, this might be sand. The configuration might be made out of sand.
Right.
And in the case of crop circles, obviously they're using crops, wheat or corn or whatever. So it doesn't matter what the substance is that the message is being that the message is using, or that whoever's making them is using as the medium to display the message. The point is that there does seem to be something's being broadcasted,
right?
And both in a very ancient context, such as in the geoglyphs of Mars, and in a more modern context, such as in the crop circles.
In the newest crop circle, does it look similar to these pictures here, like with the blocks and beads? And
no,
things?
the crop circles are different. The configurations are different, and they vary. I mean, sometimes they're pictures, like images of things. Sometimes there seems to be code embedded in there. Some of them are hoaxes, but the most intricate ones I don't believe can be hoaxes.
Right.
And certainly the geoglyphs of Tiwanaku and the situation on Mars cannot be hoaxes. It's just absolutely impossible. For one thing, the scope of the geoglyphs of Tiwanaku is just immense, hundreds of miles.
Yeah.
And it's definitely very, 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 very ancient in Bolivia's case. So Definitely, we're not dealing with a hoax from NASA. It might be misdirection. It might be soft disclosure.
Right, and that actually leads to what else we wanted to ask is why would NASA do this? Release information, call it a specific thing, and then the next day debunk themselves.
Just to see what would happen.
Right. I think we're undergoing soft disclosure. In other words, that we're being gradually introduced, acclimated to the idea that there is an intelligent influence that is non-human that's at work here. The suggestion is being made to us, and it's not only being made to us apparently by NASA, but also by the Vatican.
Right.
And other institutions. Yeah. So the Vatican is, of course, we know, and this is part of our film in True Legends, the episode 2, The Unholy See, that the Vatican is already formulating doctrine.
Oh, wow.
To introduce to the world these so-called alien saviors, but also to be able to create a biblical context for them.
So, what kind of theology are they trying to build around that?
Well, I think ultimately they're going to claim that Jesus was himself an extraterrestrial, or somehow connected to a group of benevolent extraterrestrials.
Right.
That may sound ridiculous, but the indications are there. If you look at what's coming out of the Vatican in terms of the documentation that they're producing, the books that are being written, the conferences that are being held, it's leaning ever increasingly towards this ancient astronaut theory and the idea that the human race was genetically engineered by a superior race.
Yeah, and we've been already seeing that promoted for years now in shows like Ancient Aliens and in a lot of movies like Prometheus and probably the new one coming out, Covenant. So there's a lot of interesting ways that this soft disclosure type of thing is happening.
Yep.
Since there seems to be a difference in the crop circle, if we call it a language or code, and these, I think a lot of times we tend to think that the enemy or these extra-dimensional entities, or however we want to refer to them, is just kind of one body or one big thing, that they would all kind of essentially be the same. But the more that I see and research this myself, it seems to be kind of like us. There's different factions of like one institution. Like we talked about this on the Sharpening Report, that there's the Vatican, and they do a lot of different, but there's also different. Do you see that in like the enemy's territory and in like the extra dimensional alien demon fallen angel,
as if there's maybe some kind of conflict happening?
Yeah. Do you think there's different factions?
Yes, I absolutely do. I think that things are not as simplistic as we may think.
Yeah.
I think that you can have a faction that can generally be described as multiple factions that can generally be described as demonic in nature, but that are not necessarily playing nice with each other.
Right.
In other words, I mean, that is the nature of the kingdom of darkness. It's not peace and love and joy and unity like the kingdom of God. It's quite the opposite.
Yeah.
And so I think that the way that these different factions are kept in line is through fear and intimidation and a force.
Yeah.
I think that's the way that frankly that our adversary runs his empire, is with those kind of tactics. And so there are probably varying factions of all kinds of things: demons, spiritual entities, corporeal entities, physical entities, hybrid entities, both perhaps off planet and under the planet. So. And some of these things are more ancient than others. Some of these entities may have an origin in pre-Adamic times, while others certainly would have an origin in pre-flood times.
Yeah.
And this is what people have to understand when dealing with these kinds of entities, non-human entities, is there's a broad spectrum. Of possibilities for these creatures. And in fact, Steve Quayle once told me that he asked a general, how many, a very well-connected general who deals in the black projects, how many different kinds of aliens are there? And the general's response was, he responded with the question, how many different kinds of insects are there?
Wow.
Oh, wow.
That's the kind of comparison that he made when Steve asked that question. So obviously, we're very likely dealing with a situation far more unfathomable and vast than we can even imagine, because, I mean, you're dealing, again, with everything from entities that may have existed before, all the way from angelic entities to corporeal physical entities that may have existed before the time of Adam, before Adam was created, then through the genetic mess that happened in the flood of Noah,
right,
all the way through, you know, to our times now. And so I think we need to be I think we have to have a broad perspective on this kind of stuff. And so, yes, to answer your question, I think that those factions, the different factions, and perhaps we can say species or races of these entities, are not necessarily playing nice with one another. They're subjugating, there's hierarchy, there's subjugation, and there may even be a little bit of war, conflict.
That does make sense.
Yeah, it does. And I think that there might be some viewers, because I've gotten this question before too, they might be wondering about what Jesus said about, and this is going to be another PECK paraphrase, which those of you who are familiar with the show will, but I have a tendency to butcher Bible verses. But basically when Jesus was accused of being inhabited by a demon or being demonic himself after he exorcised someone, you know, after he banished demons out of somebody, he said something along the lines of, you know, the house of Satan doesn't feud with itself, or not that, but it was
kingdom
something
against itself cannot stand. Or
Thank you. Yeah.
Yes.
So with that, how does that apply here? Because I don't necessarily agree with this interpretation, but I've heard the interpretation made, well, since Jesus said that, then the enemy, you know, all demons and fallen angels, they get along towards one goal against God. But the evidence doesn't really seem to say that.
I used to think that too. I used to think that the kingdom of darkness was like this well-oiled machine, and that it was just everybody was doing the same thing and on the same page, until I realized that many of these demonic entities, whatever they are located in very strange places. That there is a concentration of demonic entities in places like the Amazon jungle, where there aren't many people.
Right.
Why are they there? What good are they to the devil if they're out in the jungle or in the desert? I mean, what influence are they having on humanity? They couldn't possibly be having a very strong influence on the vast masses, since they're living in these very secluded places. So, and that's a fact. Because I can attest personally that the Amazon jungle is definitely the abode of many strange entities, demonic entities, all of them. And so that got me thinking, why in the world are they here and not, you know, down the river in the city? Why are they residing here? And certainly there's demonic activity that happens in cities and places like that. But perhaps they're there because they don't play nice with the other entities that are over there. There may be conflict. Not now. Are they? They all are swayed towards. They're all evil. Let's say that, and they're all moving in the same general direction. But it would make sense to me, for example, if we look at the Book of Enoch, and we see that according to the Book of Enoch, the judgment that was passed on the giants, part of the judgment was that when they were slain, they killed each other. When they were slain, that their spirits would not find rest, that they were neither of their fathers, the angels. They were not fully of their fathers, the angels. Neither were they fully of their mothers, humans. They were more angelic, the Book of Enoch says, than they were human, but they were not entirely, they did not entirely belong to either category. So their sentence from God was actually a very torturous one. They would be doomed to wander the earth. These are the spirits of the giants. They would be doomed to wander the earth bodiless. That they did not have a place in heaven, nor did they have a place in the corporeal world. In other words, in the physical world, yet they would have all the physical desires. That they would have all the passions of the flesh would still be alive in them.
Hunger and thirst.
They would thirst and they would have no way to fulfill their thirst. They would hunger and they would have no way to fulfill their hunger. They would have sexual desires and have no way to fulfill their sexual desires. So, and that they would be the enemy. They would be the enemy of humanity. And so these would become the possessing spirits. What later the New Testament calls the unclean spirits.
Right.
Yeah.
And isn't it interesting that you never hear about unclean spirits until after Genesis 6?
That's right.
Yep.
So you have unclean spirits that are wandering the earth. What do they want? A body.
Yep.
So are they necessarily agents of the devil on a particular on a particular mission? Even though they're part of the dark side, they're evil. I tend to believe that these unclean spirits are just consumed with one desire, and that is to have a body.
Yeah,
They're looking for a body. They want to fulfill the passions of the flesh because they don't have flesh.
That's right.
So they have to take your flesh in order to have to inhabit your flesh in order to be able to experience the passions of the flesh and the manifestations of. And the interesting thing is that they hate humanity.
Yeah.
Even though they come from us, so to speak, they hate us. And that is borne out. If you've ever encountered a truly, authentically demon-possessed individual, you will notice that there's a duality happening inside of them. On one hand, the spirits, these unclean spirits, are using them to fulfill pleasurable desires. On the other hand, they're purposely abusing the bodies to inflict damage on them.
Yes.
Right.
They're using the vessel, but they hate the vessel.
Yep.
So they're using it for pleasure, but they're also battering it and torturing the individual whose body that belongs to.
Wow.
And this is interesting because when Jesus shows up, because along with this banishment from God to the ethereal realm, so to speak, without bodies, they can't have bodies unless they inhabit them. Along with that sentencing, that judgment, was that they would wander the earth bodiless, hungering, not being able to fulfill their hunger, thirsting, not being able to fulfill their thirst, until the day of judgment. Until the time came when they would be judged. Well, when Jesus shows up, what happens? Specifically, these unclean spirits come running to him, inhabiting the bodies of these individuals. They throw themselves at their feet and they say, what we know who you are. You are the Son of God. Why have you come prematurely? Why have you come to torture us?
Yeah.
Wow.
To judge us, to torture us prematurely. They knew the hour had not yet come, but yet the judge had appeared on the earth.
Wow.
Isn't that interesting that they could
so
recognize
cool.
who the judge was? They recognize him and they throw themselves on the ground and they scream. And what did Jesus tell them? Be silent. He didn't want the testimony of the demons to declare who he was.
That's right.
Wow. We're going to have to talk more about this next week because we are all out of time. But join us next week. We're going to continue this conversation with Tim Alberino. Until then, take care and God bless.